I would like to present the first speaker, Orit Gat, who will give a talk which is entitled From Afar, Football, Migration and the Sense of Belonging. So we will actually start with football, which I think is really interesting, especially because we are all in art context. So Orit Gat is a writer. She's currently living in London, and she has been writing about digital culture and art for quite some time for very different media, from Freeze, Art Review, LA Review of Books, World Policy Journal, and the White Review, where she's also a contributing editor. And she has been a winner of Creative Capital Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant. And currently she's working on her first book, which is titled If Anything Happens. And we will hear a bit about this. So this is a second reading recommendation. The book looks at football as a prism through which to explore questions about immigration, nationalism, race, gender, money, love, and the possibility of belonging. So Orit, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'm going to start by describing the book a little bit, but the way I describe it, so I've just finished writing it like 2 weeks ago. Hopefully it will be published in time for the World Cup in 2022, before the World Cup in Qatar, which is another part of the complexity of money and migration and football. But I've been a sports fan my whole life, and I've been watching football, or soccer as Americans would call it, since I was a little girl. But the beginning of this book was actually an essay for an exhibition that I was writing. A curator who was working on a show about how technology affected our sense of time contacted me and just asked me to write like a general thing about like our sense of time, digital time. And I pitched something about reading online, and he said yes. And as I started doing research for it, I was watching a game, illegally streaming it, and texting with a friend of mine in Berlin. I was in New York, he was in Berlin, and there was this moment when he was just like, "Oh, that was brilliant." And I said, "What was brilliant?" And he was like, "The goal." And then we realized that we were about 30 seconds apart from each other. And he was like, "Okay, I'll know not to tell you anything for 30 seconds every time. I'll just type, like, don't even look to see if I'm typing, and I'll press send 30 seconds later when I know we're in the same place in the game." And I just thought about that experience and like how fractured and yet shared our sense of time was. And I asked the curator if I could write about that. And I ended up writing about illegal streaming and copyright law and the experience of time and illegality as combined. And the curator was like, "Yes, of course, you're so weird. Let me do it." And then I wrote it in about 2 days and was just like, okay, I've got a book topic. Like, this is the first time I've ever thought that it was time to write a book. And so I started doing research again and collected like every book that I could find about football. And the fact that they were all written by men was both very discouraging and very motivating to me, kind of depending on the day. Like when I would lose faith in it, I would think to myself, like, who am I? I grew up very far from the centers of like power and football and representation. Why would I write a book about something that so many men are so passionate about? And then in other days, I would look at the back cover of Nick Hornby's Fever Pitch, which is one of the most famous and like far-reaching football books. Like every football fan has read Fever Pitch. And the back cover of my edition read, "I fell in love with football as I was later to fall in love with women. Suddenly, inexplicably, uncritically, giving no thought to the pain or destruction that it would bring." And I just wanted to resist it and offer something else, because a woman could never write something like this and still be taken seriously. And so I'm writing this book that tries to be taken seriously and to take football very seriously. The book, which is called If Anything Happens, as Yarna said, starts with a section called From Afar. And I write about growing up in the Middle East and imagining Europe based on images of football stadiums in the middle of like residential neighborhoods that I would never get to. I try to imagine walking to the stadium of the team that I support in Northern England, which has a very different class and race and religious identity to the one that I grew up in. I didn't even speak a word of English when I started supporting a Northern English team. But as a child, this was the only image that I had of a different world. And I still want to insist on that. So when I started writing this book, I kept thinking about the memoirs and novels written by women about motherhood and about work, the kinds of books that teach you about how society shapes you as a woman. And then I wanted to think about my fandom as a methodology through which to think about identity as a migrant, as a woman, as a Middle Eastern woman, and to also really insist on the fact that love is a choice and that love can be a way of relating to things, and that to choose to love something is to insist on how plural it is. Okay, so I'm from the Middle East. I write a lot in the book about where I'm from, but what I want to talk about today is the West and not the East, and how experiences and histories of migration are fractured into football, specifically as a media environment and as a system of representation, and hopefully also as a space of discussion. So I want to talk about how countries see themselves as individuals and what happens when friction happens. So I want to talk about Zinedine Zidane as like the ultimate model of this, and like not Zinedine Zidane's amazing career as captain of France, as the person who got them their first World Cup trophy in 1998. I want to talk about 1 minute in Zinedine Zidane's career in which he headbutts an Italian player in the final of the World Cup in 2006. Okay, so what follows is like a cut down version of a chapter from the book. It's going to take me about 10, 12 minutes to read, and I will try and be just as engaging when I read from the book as I am when I rant about the process of writing the book. Okay, so the road to the final of the 2006 World Cup was paved with spontaneous, joyful signs of unity in Paris. After games, familiar shouts, Zidane for presidency and Allez les Bleus would echo everywhere. When the team made it to the 2006 final, it recorded the same sense of joy that maybe many people recognized from 1998, when France hosted and won the World Cup. Then, the 26-year-old Zinedine Zidane, who scored 2 of France's 3 goals against Brazil in the final, was a symbol of the accomplished, beloved French team. Born in Marseille to parents of Algerian descent who emigrated to France before the Algerian War, he was also a symbol of a national team whose success was swiftly appropriated to hail French multiculturalism. Comprised of several second-generation sons of immigrants from the former French colonies, the 1998 French national team was described as Black, Blanc, and Beurre. Black for players who were often the descendants of parents from West African countries colonized by France. Beurre is Arab for verlan, it's Arab in verlan. Verlan is a form of French slang that involves flipping over the syllables of a word. So verlan itself is verlan of l'envers, which means the inverse of something. And blanc means white. Football is a mirror of society, and in France, it reflects the aftermath of centuries of colonialism. In 1998, the millions of people who went out to celebrate their country's first World Cup title at the Champs-Élysées waved both French and Algerian flags side by side. In the days after that victory, Jean-Marie Le Pen, leader of the extreme right party, the Front National, praised Zidane as a son of French Algeria. That anyone would still refer to any of the former colonies of France feels like a chilling wave from the past. Zidane, the son of Kabyle, or a Berber ethnic group originating in northern Algeria, immigrants, who moved to France in 1953 before the beginning of the Algerian War of Liberation, has often skirted any discussion of politics directly, knowing that his words were likely to draw a lot of attention and that his image, his story, and his success will be appropriated for political gain. This has made it much easier for the French to love him without having to confront any of the difficult questions about racism and class and the country's colonial legacy that Zidane's family story just embodies. Uncharacteristically, in 2017, Zidane publicly declared his support for Emmanuel Macron in the second round of the French presidential election against Marine Le Pen of the National Front, who is Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter. What he said was, the message is always the same, just like in 2002. I'm far from all of these ideas of the Front National. We need to avoid them to the maximum. Extremism is never good. The translation is mine. In 2002, as in 2017, the Front National made it to the second round of the French 2-round presidential election system. And in both, the other candidates, Jacques Chirac in 2002, Macron in 2017, won by a very large margin. In 2002, Zidane said that the Front National did not align with the values of France. And this is exactly the story that France loves to tell itself, that there is a good immigrant like Zidane who tells the nation that it isn't extremist. The waving of French and Algerian flags side by side on the Champs-Élysées is the hollow gesture of a country that is only interested in good immigrants. So, in 2006, there were 22 players in the Olympic Stadium in Berlin for that World Cup final. But when I think back about it, it was a duel. Zinedine Zidane and the Italian defender Marco Materazzi. Zidane scores first, 7 minutes into the game, from the penalty spot, after a foul by Materazzi on winger Florent Malouda. In the 19th minute, it's Materazzi heading in a corner kick that was delivered by midfielder Andrea Pirlo. Then Materazzi almost headed another one in, and it was Florent Malouda who cleared it from behind the goalkeeper. Lilian Thuram blocked Italian defender Franco Tutti from scoring on his last international game for Italy. Luca Toni scored from an offside position. Balls hit the crossbar. Thierry Henry passed the defense numerous times. The Italians never stopped attacking. Malouda and Franck Ribéry missed so many shots from the outside of the penalty box, and at full time it was still 1-1. 30 minutes of added time to break the tie, and if the score would remain, then the game would go to penalties. Deep into extra time, Zidane heads the ball so forcefully that when he was saving it, the Italian goalkeeper Gianluigi Buffon had to fall from the impact. In the 108th minute, so like 12 minutes before the game ends, the players are already exhausted. There's a sense of lingering slowness, a lack of attention. When it happens, the referee doesn't see it, nor do the pundits, but it's caught on camera. I've now seen it so many times that it feels almost familiar. I can't remember not knowing this moment. In replays, it feels slow and decisive in the way that almost strips the moment of any violence in it. Zidane, turning toward Materazzi, headbutts him in the chest. I remember everything about it. I remember the camera initially focused on Materazzi on the ground. I remember the commentator saying, "Oh, oh." I watch it again on YouTube, and what he says is, "Oh, Zinedine." And then he continues, "Pas ça, not that. Pas ça, Zinedine." The referee goes to the linesman. There are all these long seconds, maybe a minute, in which the whole world knows that football is different now, that something momentous has happened that will forever be referred to. Then the red card. "Oh no," shouts the commentator. Zidane takes off the captain's armband. He passes by the trophy as he steps off the field. It's his last game. He retired that summer, and France lost the final on penalties, 3-5. After that final, Zidane never said what Materazzi told him. Just then, before that moment, before the headbutting, before the red card, before the end, before the loss, I start typing into the Google search bar, "What did Materazzi?" And Google autocompletes. What did Materazzi say? What did Materazzi say about Zidane's sister? What did Materazzi say to Zidane racism? And the very misguided, what did Materazzi say to Zidane Yahoo? No idea why anyone would Google Yahoo. It's a mystery I can't solve. In September 2006, CNN ran an article stating that Materazzi told an Italian sports newspaper called La Gazzetta dello Sport that Zidane, in response to the Italian consistently tugging at his shirt, told him that if he wanted his shirt so much, he would give it to Materazzi after the final whistle, referring to the friendly tradition of players exchanging shirts at the end of a match. Materazzi, in response, muttered, "I would prefer your sister." It's the kind of verbal taunting that is so common between players, the Italian excused himself. He said he recognizes it's not a particularly nice thing to say, but that what followed, the headbutting that is, it wasn't sparked by him. The CNN article is one of countless that I read and reread. I search my memory. Could I have known and forgotten? Could I remember the commentary? No, Zinedine. And then forget whether Zidane ever explained what happened? I Google it again. The Guardian ran an article in 2007 titled, and Materazzi's exact words to Zidane were ... citing a television interview in which Materazzi gave the exact same version, the comment about Zidane's sister. There were rumors that what he said to Zidane was about Zidane's mother. Materazzi denies it. He said he lost his mother when he was 15, and so he's very sensitive to that kind of joke. Some people said that he called Zidane a terrorist. Materazzi denies it. And poet Claudia Rankine, in her book Citizen, an American Lyric, cites lip readers who said that what he said was big Algerian shit, dirty terrorist, sand nigger. Materazzi again denies it. FIFA, the world organizing body for all football, had cleared Materazzi of any such claim, saying that FIFA's investigations concluded that his comments were of a defamatory but not a racist nature. Rankine doesn't buy it. In Citizen, her book of poetry about America and race, which explores the language and image of racism, chapter 6 includes a number of scripts. There's a script about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. There's a script about Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old British man who was shot by the Metropolitan Police in London in 2011. There's one about Trayvon Martin, who was shot by cops in Miami in 2012. And then there's one dedicated to Zidane headbutting Materazzi. Earlier in the poetry book, Rankine writes about tennis player Serena Williams, her outrage and exhaustion at the racism that she experienced on and off the court, her anger, and how she kept going. The Zidane section includes a horizontal strip across it, across the pages, a film strip of the headbutting moment. Like in the section about Serena Williams, Rankine writes about Zidane with an understanding of how racism winds the person and the player. Only Rankine doesn't write in this chapter at all. The entire section is compiled of quotes by Zidane himself, by philosophers Maurice Blanchot, Ralph Allison, by Frantz Fanon, by William Shakespeare, James Baldwin, Homi Bhabha, Frederick Douglass, and then the account of the lip readers who watched the exchange between Materazzi and Zidane. Big Algerian shit, dirty terrorist, sand nigger. The pages of the Zidane script are all stamped with a light gray with the type black, blanc, beurre. It looks like the red stamps on boxes that says fragile. The source of the quotes from the Zidane chapter that Rankine includes is the source of quotes of Zidane that Rankine includes is a 2004 interview between Zidane and a historian, Andrew Hussey. In the interview, it brings together the rare talent and the racism, the sublime elegance that Zidane embodies, the violence that he had experienced himself, and the violence that he enacted. It is not a question and answer kind of interview, but rather Hussey's attempt at drawing a full, legible character of Zidane from what the player had said to him. Of course, it's impossible. The privacy, the silence, the few words, the never discussing politics. But the interview ends with a long quote. Zidane says, "It's hard to explain, but I have a need to play intensely every day, to fight every match hard. And this desire never to stop fighting is something else I learned in the place I grew up in. And for me, the most important thing is that I still know who I am. Every day I think about where I come from, and I'm still proud of who I am. First a Kabyle from La Castellane, then an Algerian from Marseille, and only then a Frenchman." France won the 2018 World Cup again. Now there's a second star above the Gaelic rooster sign on the left side of the French national kit. Two World Cup wins, 20 years apart. So much of what I remember from that night of the 2006 final is my friends and I on a bench in a public square in Paris, trying to make sense of what we didn't actually see. Was it racism? Was it Materazzi's behavior, grating on Zidane all match long? Was it the emotion of his last game? Was it the occasion? And then again, as always, was it racism? Was it the way that the experience of racism chafes at you, as it did with Serena Williams in Rankine's description, as it must have Zidane as well, tasked with unifying the nation in every World Cup? I watched a YouTube video of that moment in 2006 again. Oh, Zinedine, passa, the 108th minute. Buffon, the Italian keeper, running to the referee to tell him what just happened. The consultation with the linesman, the red card, Zidane not objecting, Zidane walking away, passing by the World Cup trophy on a pedestal near the tunnel that leads back to the dressing rooms. The camera shifts to the French manager, Raymond Domenech, who cynically applauds the ref, but the commentator disagrees. He says, "We can't protest, we can't challenge this decision, even if something happened between them." I watch it all again. I remember everything about that moment. I now know that I don't know what happened, but I do know the legacy of Zidane, and that moment is still unresolved. And I think about an article that was published just after the World Cup by American sports writer Dave Zirin, charting examples of racism in football in the years leading to the 2006 World Cup, and how the cup itself was not infested with it until those waning moments of the last game. We don't know with certain irony what Materazzi says, Zirin writes, but if it turns out to be more of the anti-Black, anti-Muslim garbage that has infested soccer like a virus, the Italian team should forfeit the cup. He concludes, Italy can set the sport back on its course with one simple, stunning gesture. Give the damn thing back. Give the damn thing back. I think back to that night in 2006. I think of Zidane, who once described how focused he is during games, saying that he's convinced he could hear the ticking of a clock on someone's wrist deep in the crowd. I think about Zidane under the floodlights of the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. I think of how it almost didn't happen. No one saw it, the referee didn't notice, the audience didn't grasp. Zidane says in that interview with The Guardian, do you think I wanted to do that? I remember all those things and imagine a third star on that deep blue French kit. Okay, that's it for this chapter.
Thank you very much, Orit. It has been definitely an interesting opening of the conference on migration. Especially, I like the way you actually addressed this in the very end, how actually bringing it back and basically acknowledging that still there was something which is completely inappropriate for a game, like there should be like this moment of kind of correction and that moment of actually speaking publicly about certain issues rather than putting them under the carpet, because this was like really nicely said, like nobody really saw it, we don't know if it really happened, and then you cannot kind of talk about it if nobody ever saw it. So in a way it doesn't really exist, even though there are like concrete physical consequences about it. Now I would just first like to ask if somebody else has a question. Now I have to check also on the Facebook. So, okay, I would just like to ask a question, like how did you came up with this 1 minute of Zinedine Zidane? Especially, I mean, this also brought to my mind this work that you may know of Felipe Pareno and Douglas Gordon of, I don't know if you are all familiar with the work, but it's actually just the whole game. 17 different cameras were just filming Zinedine Zidane, and this was like 21st century portrait. And basically he was just like, it was just him in the whole screen for I don't know how long, 120 minutes. And it was, I saw the work at one exhibition and it was really huge, like in meters. So it was really like very, very present. And it was interesting because it was on some way, there was this moment of different kind of representation. So I'm just curious that how come you came to this moment of 1 minute and to kind of insert all those different kind of, this kind of minute was actually the trigger for all this other analysis of all sort of other social and political complexities that are actually built around it.
I think that personally, like the book that I've been writing is a bit of a memoir, right? Like it includes all these moments of me and my friends watching games together. And I remember like sitting, I was living in Paris at the time, and sitting in the park with my friends, most of whom were white and French, and how much football has taught me about representation and identification. And like being Middle Eastern, I come from a culture where like everybody looked like me. I only learned that I was different when I actually moved to the West and to Europe. I had a very similar experience watching the Women's World Cup over the years and like really identifying with female players. But that one game with Zidane, when like his last game, the game that he retires after, when he leaves on a red card, when this like very violent moment happened, what I remember the most is this really strong fear that I had that so much progress in the kind of conversations that I was having with my friends about race and migration would be erased in that moment, and that Zidane had done this thing and stopped being a symbol. And in a way, I wanted to release him from being a symbol. I wanted to release him from being like the son of French Algeria or the good migrant. I wanted to allow him to have complexities. And do you think I wanted to do that? But I also wanted to ask about that moment and see if it changed French society for the better or the worst. And so like this idea of like giving the damn thing back and like allowing for like real societal change through a gesture in a system of representation is a kind of hopefulness too, that like this is a culture that would allow more discourse, more understanding of difference, and more understanding of like a post-colonial structure in a country that has obviously like brought about a lot of inequality.
Thank you very much. I also wonder if somebody of you has a question for Orit. If not, I will then continue with another talk. I think this, what you have mentioned about challenging the system of representation, actually it's something that we are going to discuss throughout the conference from different points of view, but I think it's very present in many of the works that we are going to hear about.